Apology is Socrates' response to the accusations that he says there are two different types of accusations against him that we are going to discuss. But it is not an apology in the way that we understand apology today, saying like, oh, I'm sorry that I did this or something like that. Its apology is more like a defense. And the term apology is, again, Greek term. The part is logi, apology. Logi is, as I said last time, language, logic, account, all the kind of logic things that add to the end of anthropology, sociology, psychology, etc., biology. So it's true. Apo is a proposition with respect to speech. So he is really giving a speech, and there is this really important relationship for Greeks with respect to logos like the speech, and ergon. Ergon means activity, doing something, saying something and doing something. One of the important questions for the Greeks is what the relationship between what you do and what you say, and whether what you say really is consistent with what you are doing. And it is a philosophical problem, which means it's not exactly the same problem throughout the history, but it is an important question that emerges at different times, namely whenever we say certain things and how we act accordingly. I mean, we criticize each other, ourselves, constantly for being hypocritical, namely saying something and then doing the opposite or something inconsistent with that. And so apology is maybe where his deeds and his words try to come together, whether they are consistent with each other. Is Socrates doing something other than what he's saying? Are his words and his actions in conflict with each other, or is he trying to articulate the fact that they are actually, he tries them to be consistent? One of the ways in which this manifests itself is in ancient Greek democracy, as you read a little bit about the nature of the trial, you can pretty much say a lot of things. You are not restricted from saying certain things, and you can make your case by playing on the emotions of the jurors too. So you can sort of try to manipulate them, you can give a good speech, and it is generally believed that somebody who speaks well really says something that is true. And this is one thing that Socrates starts out the dialogue, that they warn him, and they warn the jurors against him. They say, Socrates speaks really well. He is a good orator. He's an accomplished speaker. Now, you can be an accomplished speaker and you say obviously false things. You can be a not good speaker and say the right thing. So this connection between the way in which you are saying something, the way in which you are articulating it, and what you are actually saying. And Socrates immediately says, I'm not an accomplished speaker. I don't have that reputation, because, I mean, as you read the dialogues, he doesn't appear to be giving like beautiful speeches or something like that. I don't know, who gives a beautiful speech nowadays? Do you have an example of somebody so that I can use it?
Barack Obama.
Did he? Okay.
I think he's a very good speaker. I don't know though.
Okay. But like, does he like say sort of emotionally, yeah, like that makes you feel like my blood boils and I feel like choking and crying or something?
Yeah, not really.
Yeah.
Um, you could use like Martin Luther King Jr. or someone like that, even though he's
Yeah.
not alive anymore.
Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. Have you actually listened to his speeches online? Okay.
I think the Kennedys are good examples. I know that probably we're playing into this stereotype, but what the hell, of being at this like small liberal arts college. We're just like throwing all this praise at these like Democratic presidents. But I, trying to separate myself from my own bias to defend my classmate there. Like, I do think that Barack Obama did have some, like, for example, a big stepping stone in his political career was his 2004 what's that called, when keynote address. He was just a state senator then. He was running for the U.S. Senate, and that's really what put him on the map. And he used a lot of the like logos, pathos, and ethos or whatever. And he made some really, in my opinion, beautiful remarks. But then, like, actually, just in Indianapolis, RFK has that famous speech about the death of MLK, where he quoted Aeschylus.
Okay, well, let's just say we have all examples in our heads about who gives a good speech, etc. But then, is there a feeling that whenever you hear a good speech, you get like emotionally affected by it, etc. But then that person goes and does something. The things that they say this beautifully, etc. And then, since they are politicians, they go do certain things. And then you go, well, these are the things that you say, and these are the things that you did. Those might be inconsistent with each other. Like, Obama was also criticized for this. Like, you give all these beautiful speeches about people and the perfect union, and then you are deporting people haphazardly, etc. So this is something that we always consider when we are listening to the speech. But also in the 21st century, do you have a little bit of suspicion, or do you not? These speeches are prepared. They are somehow prepared with all sorts of anticipations of people's reaction. So it is more like a advertisement campaign than some kind of pouring out your emotions. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think a big part of that too is that oftentimes politicians have speech writers, and so these aren't actually their words. And that's actually one of the reasons I thought of Barack Obama, is because he writes his speeches.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that we just kind of expect with politicians, that like someone else wrote what they're saying. Because oftentimes, like, it's very convincing, it's awesome, but like for some reason it's just not them. And for some people, I feel like it just feels more like them. And so that just came to mind for me, speechwriters.
Okay, so when you read this speech, I mean, you read Apology, what did you think? I mean, is it a good speech? I mean, go ahead, Emily.
I mean, I found some lines that I thought were really good and like pretty deep.
Some lines, yes, but overall?
I mean, overall, I just thought it was kind of fitting that like he was on trial and just talked for so long.
Yes, okay. But he doesn't really say like, don't kill me because I'm innocent or something like that. So it's not exactly a defense, but it is
I thought it was beautiful.
You thought it was?
I was like pretty close. Whenever I get pretty excited. So whenever I hear something that's like really inspiring, I was like this close to putting some of the stuff up on my wall that he was talking about. I was so pumped when I read this. The only thing that I kind of took issue with, and maybe it's because I misunderstood it, was I thought he was being kind of pretentious whenever he said he said something along the lines of like, and he did this long proof of like, and therefore I am superior to other men, and people see me as superior. I thought that was kind of pretentious, but other than that, I was like, dang, I felt so great.
So why don't you like pretentious?
Are you asking me?
No, in general. I mean, I mean, sure, because you use the term, but why don't we like pretentious? This is a serious question. Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
This is kind of just like speculation, but I feel like there's almost not like an expectation, but like a feeling in society that like if you are going to be successful, you should probably be more humble about it. It's like we like people who are humble because they don't come off as like in your face, like, oh, I'm great and I know it. So I don't know.
Could it be perhaps that we expect people, I mean, we start out with the assumption that all people should be equal. Hence, if somebody says that they are not equal and because they are successful or because they are this and they are pretentious or not humble enough, we somehow question that. Now, okay, so this is an affect. This is what you feel maybe when you are listening to somebody and they are sounding pretentious and you are uncomfortable about it. And then you need to sort of turn back onto yourself and say, why do I find this disturbing? Why do I find this uncomfortable? Because I operate with the assumption all people should be equal. And even if they might think that, and sometimes as a human being, you ought to, and I'm sure you do, you think that you are better than other people, at least some people. But to verbalize it and to say it is somehow making us uncomfortable or not like that person. What is this expectation of humility? Like, why do we expect this? And maybe because we assume that everybody should be equal, and if somebody happens to be successful, that is not particularly because they are superior to other people, but because they have better luck, fortune, and for the Greeks, that's a really important thing, that, you know, you have fortune, you have like good luck, good fate, like F-A-T-E, good fate in terms of your life. So it's not really your doing. But it is a paradox because we also think that most of us, especially in individualistic modern societies or even postmodern societies, that we create our own fortune. We are the result of our own actions, we make our own, etc., which would give all the more reason for people to be more pretentious. Like, oh, I don't know, like, who do we consider to be successful members of our society? People who have a lot of money and rich people. That's the value of our society. We don't find philosophers interesting. We don't find I don't know, like doctors particularly interesting, but we find like, oh, rich people. Like, I remember a number of years ago, and still is, like Steve Jobs is like the role model of all the people. Like, he's so wonderful because he's rich and he got poor. I mean, not poor, but like he was fired and then he got back on. So he's successful. So obviously he thinks he is superior to a lot of people. And we think, I mean, not that we as persons think, but as a society, we consider him to be superior. So why do we not say that? Why do we not reveal what we deem to be important? We do actually, I mean, but you shouldn't. That person shouldn't. Like, Steve Jobs shouldn't be too pretentious. We will be pretentious on his behalf. We'll say how wonderful he is, etc. Now, what Socrates is trying to get at, I mean, I don't know whether it's pretentious or not, I wouldn't, because he didn't even speak, like, this is not even his speech. This is Plato being pretentious on his behalf, if anything, because Plato thinks Socrates is great. So I might him say some pretentious things because he's so wonderful. But he says, don't pay attention to the way in which I say it. I'm not a good speaker. The only question that you should ask, whether I'm saying the truth, whether what I'm saying is correct and true or not. And if you accept certain things because they are expressed well, then you really confuse substance with style. You are really talking about the style, the way in which it is articulated. And this is really a huge problem for us because we are so obsessed with style, the way in which something is presented, and all the judgments that we make about things, especially in a sort of mass media society or social media society, is we really judge the appearance. We only judge the appearance, and we love with respect to how it is presented to us, and we really don't pay attention to the substance. Now, one thing that I observe this is certain shows that I like, certain dramas that I like. I like certain police dramas, for example, or some law dramas, etc. And I watch them, I say, oh, they are really good. And then when I stop and say, what are they exactly saying? What exactly is their message? Are they telling the truth? Then you realize everything that you like also is hiding or somehow presenting you a political message that you absolutely disagree. Then the question is, how do we decide whether something is appearing to be politically good, appearing to be appealing and stylish, good, but also presenting us something that is highly problematic politically? So I don't know whether you have that, like whatever show that you are following now on whatever medium that you are following, and binging and then watching, etc., you should immediately question their political message. And mostly they are not good, not as good as their style. So Socrates is really struggling against this question and saying, like, I don't have a style. I'm like an old man with really terrible outfit and terrible face, terrible appearance, and everything about me is ugly, so you don't really need to fall for the person. It's not about the way in which that person appears, but whether they tell the truth. So I think part of what Plato is trying to get at is the youth follows Socrates not because he's popular, not because he is appearing stylish and they want to imitate him or something like that. They love him, and there are like dialogues about this, including one called Symposium, where people love him not because of the way he appears, but how he makes other people think. So people who follow him like themselves when they listen to what Socrates is saying and thinking about it for themselves. Not because, oh, like I want to be like him, but I am considering what he says content-wise to be important. That's a very important distinction. So it is very different than a role model, for example, because even if he says, don't follow me, and I think Riley was making this case, you still don't follow him because he says, don't follow me. You follow him because of what he says. You believe in what he says. You believe in the primacy of thinking. So that's why he was accused to make the verse argument stronger. I think part of it is this kind of notion that his argument doesn't appear to be good. He's just asking questions. He's not making this profound point. He's not making this flashy, emotional argument. His examples are really boring, and he talks about like horses and ships and like, all sorts of like really boring things. And he is not exciting. He is not presenting it in a nice way. He doesn't have slideshow and PowerPoint presentation or something like that. But people are compelled to follow his thinking. And that's probably the most dangerous, because that can be not co-opted. Like the one thing we need to think about, like a lot of things that people do as a criticism of the power can always be co-opted by the power. So, like, if you are a good politician, if you are an effective politician, you do not really dismiss your opposition. You try to incorporate your opposition, your criticism into your power. So, like, this works generally with respect to capitalism. So if you are opposed to capitalism, right? So you create a different lifestyle. What capitalism does is to co-opt that lifestyle and sell it back. So it says, if you want to be a critique, I mean, this is this is a very interesting observation that I made the other way. So, like, do you know there are socially responsible credit cards? So you see the logic in this, right? Bank of America is giving its clients the way to be socially responsible and critical, even critical of capitalism. I think that pretty soon there's going to be a credit card saying this is an anti-capitalist credit card, which you understand that it incorporates the logic of its criticism and reframes it and sells it back to people. Now, power can do that. Political power can do that. So if you are sort of, I don't know, like critical of federal government can subsidize T-shirts that says, I am critical of federal government, and then take that money and put into federal programs. So that's the sort of logic of how power can co-opt its opposition. But what it cannot co-opt is this questioning. Imagine a political power that constantly asks questions. Like Trump saying, like, am I a good president? Is what I'm doing really right? Is this like correct? Should we really be doing this? The most destabilizing thing is questioning, not the judgment, because you can co-opt the judgment, but you really cannot co-opt the question. So therefore, people in position of power see Socrates really as a threat, because question doesn't have the same impact as an opposing opinion, because an opposing opinion can always be incorporated, as I gave all these examples, etc. So that's why he makes the worse argument stronger. No, because he doesn't even have an argument. He just has this question with respect to the strength of any argument. And any argument that is exposed to questioning, even the most basic, absolutist, absolutely true principles and arguments that you might have, is going to be subject to questioning. And when they don't have the same strength. So the logic of it makes weaker arguments strong. No, it actually makes stronger argument weak, and it makes questions stronger by really questioning the legitimacy of any power. Is that clear in terms of the first accusation and why it is so actually detrimental for the political power? Because questions, well, I don't know. Maybe questions can be too nowadays, but questions are more difficult to co-opt. Okay, there are two sets of accusations. One is Socrates is guilty. Okay, so I should maybe put this up so that we can follow from the text. Okay, you can all see it. Okay. Let us make up the case at the beginning. This is the paragraph here. That is What is the accusation from which arose the slander in which Meletus trusted when he wrote out the charge against me? This is here. You see it, right? What did they say when they slandered me? I must, as if they were my actual prosecutors, read affidavit that they would have sworn. It goes something like this. Socrates is guilty of wrongdoing in that he busies himself studying things in the sky and below the earth. He makes the verse into the stronger argument, and he teaches these same things to others. You have seen this yourself in the comedy of Aristophanes, as Socrates swinging about there, saying that he was walking on air and talking a lot of other nonsense about things of which I know nothing at all. I do not speak in contempt of such knowledge, if someone is wise in these things, lest Meletus bring more cases against me. But gentlemen, I have no part in it. And on this point, I call upon the majority of you to witness. I think it's right that all those of you who have heard me conversing, and many have, should tell each other, if any one of you has ever heard me, discussing such subjects to any extent at all. From this, you will learn that the other things said about me, the majority, are of the same kind. So this is from 23 to 24. Not one of them is true. And if you have heard from anyone that I undertake to teach people and charge a fee for it, that is not true either. So he is here contesting, as I said last time, sort of sophists in ancient Greek society. Sophists are people who teach people how to talk, how to make convincing arguments, how debate. And that's one of the things that I find particularly curious in some certain philosophy circles. There's a debate team. Like, if you are in a, has anyone been in a debate team? You have, Nolia?
I've been on a mock trial team, which is like a debate team.
Yeah, let's think about that for a second. You're a student and you go to a mock trial team and trying to do something, and your skill is not to defend what you believe in. Your skill is to defend anything. So you learn a skill to be able to present an argument of the opposite side, for example, from that. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. All I'm saying that teaches you how to separate presentation from the content. And it is presented as a skill. Now, unless you use that skill in order to come up with the best possible position, then it becomes an abstract skill. So yes, if you are debating something in your mind, for example, you need to make the best possible case for the opposing opinion, such that your opinion or whatever position you have can even be stronger. So some critics might say this, but they are wrong because of this, etc. Now, this is a very tricky business because on the one hand, it takes you away from truth, because no debate ever ends with somebody claiming to tell the truth. The judges simply say, oh, you did this better. And you win the argument. But should you win the argument? Is it always the most important thing to win the argument, or not? What do you think?
For me, that was very tricky. I decided I did not want to be spend my life in a courtroom after that, because it was very much like I was just given this thing and I have to figure out how to kind of believe in it. But for me, my role, I had the same role on both the prosecution and the defense. And so I had to be arguing two completely different things. So I really could not have like even create an opinion from there. And it was a very weird in between and a lot different from anything I'd ever done. Yeah.
No, that's a really good position. Let's just think of this in the case of trials. Like, we just sort of say, we don't know the truth. We don't know what actually happened. In order to understand this, we are going to make opposing views as strong as possible, and whoever wins is going to be the truth. Now, what's the problem with that? What is the issue with that?
That like, what if the opposing view is like, what if there really is a truth to it, but the person who's the better debater or whatever is arguing the worst side?
Yes, I mean, that's immediately the first problem. Yes, like, what if you are not strong, even if you are telling the truth? Does the truth, being on the right side, does that give you any strength, or is it completely independent and you still have to do the presentation?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely independent, especially if you don't have the right amount of evidence. Like, you could know something is true, but you're the only person who knows it, and you don't have any witnesses to prove that it's just not something you're making up. And so, like, there's so many things that really have to come into place in order for the truth to actually be recognized.
So you live in a society. Now, I mean, some of you in this society, some of you in other societies. So if you are if you were accused of something, what would you do? How would you go about in this day and age to defend yourself? Always the same people are talking, so other people talk. How would you defend yourself? Like, somebody accused you of something. What would you do? What would you do? Be the first thing that you would do?
I mean, I would try to defend my character first and like try to show them like based off what the accusation like they're accusing me of like doing, like I would try to just like give them like counter arguments as to like why like their conclusion of like what I've done is like wrong, and like to show them like I am like something that they don't think I am.
Okay. More like simply, like they took you to court. What would you do?
I mean, I would defend myself and just like provide evidence as to like why I'm not like in this guilty party that they think I'm in.
Is there something even more basic before that you should do? Aaron?
Well, I mean, like if I was accused of something and I know that I wasn't, I'd get like a lawyer or somebody to defend me and say that I'm not.
Let's think about this logic. Like, you cannot, should not, do not trust yourself, and you shouldn't, to defend yourself as Rosie does, but you should immediately get a lawyer. Like, what is that? I mean, it either happened or didn't happen. I'm either guilty or not guilty. Why do I need a lawyer to begin with?
I mean, I feel like most people would get a lawyer because, I mean, you always want to defend yourself, so you're going to find some way to prove that you're not. But also, I know, like, for me, I'm not very good at, like, getting my point across, so I'm just going to keep going around and be like, no, I'm innocent, I'm this, maybe with no hard facts, but somebody who is really good at, like arguing. Like that's kind of going back to the truth may not ever come out. It just depends on who argues better. And I know I'm not going to be that person, so I'm going to find someone who can argue better for me.
Exactly. So where is the question of justice in this? I mean, you are absolutely right. So I'm not asking this to you, but in the principle of it, like, where is the question of justice in this, in the sense that the really guilty should be punished and the innocent should not be? So you already given up that idea to who defends his or her position or their position better, who makes a better argument, who speaks well, who articulates the idea as well. Now, but then also, who finds evidence? Liesl said, like, I would find facts, and of course you try to find evidence for, what can be presented. But it is played in this game that you, as an ordinary citizen, have no idea unless you are a lawyer. And even being a lawyer is not enough. You have to be like a specific kind of lawyer, criminal lawyer, tax lawyer, divorce lawyer, or whatever. You need to know those. Now, a sort of complicated, obviously, set of like rules of evidence, etc. So we already don't trust ourselves to be able to defend ourselves the best, even though presumably we know the best, whether we did it or not. And how many of you would say, if they are accused, you would say, yeah, I did it, I should be punished? How many of you truly believe that if you did something wrong, you should be punished and you should go ask for that punishment? Or do you believe this principle in the abstract, like guilty people should be punished except for me? When I'm guilty, I should not be punished, I should get away with it, but then I'll sort of like make amends in my mind about it. So, anybody?
I would kind of go I actually often have dreams where I've like murdered like 15 people, and sometimes the worst part is just like the guilt, and then I feel horribly, I don't know. I often feel compelled to sort of tattle on myself. I don't really know why. But then on the other hand,
Let's call it nightmares, okay? Like, don't call dreams. Let's call it nightmares. That's a better.
Yeah, fair enough. But then I also I deeply believe that that it's at least in what we have now in our system, that it's the burden of the state to prove that you're guilty. And I dislike how many, a lot of times people will just plead guilty before something happens, because like so-called detectives will like say that they have some evidence when maybe they're just totally lying, and then they get you to confess to something that maybe you are guilty of, but they couldn't have actually proven that, and they'll just lie to you. So like, I kind of think I would maybe operate the opposite way, that for me personally, then I'd probably confess or whatever. But if I'm like representing someone else, or if I'm just thinking about how I'd feel about someone else, no, like I think completely it's the state's job to show that you've done something wrong. There's no reason for you to feel compelled to come forward,
other than the fact that you did it.
Right, but it's their job to. But I'm saying that I wouldn't judge somebody for not coming forward, even though I would.
Okay, so if you were accused of something, what is your immediate reaction? To defend yourself, right? But do you really think about the fact that, yeah, actually I am guilty, I did what they said they did, so therefore I should be punished? Now, the reason I'm asking this is this situation with Socrates. So when you read an apology, just be honest with me now. Do you think Socrates is guilty or not? You don't think he is guilty? Why? He is freaking guilty. He is terribly guilty. He did exactly what they said he did.
Well, I like his point that like they think that he deliberately corrupted the youth, like he intended to, but he's saying he did not. And he says that like if someone does not mean to do something like that, then the courtroom is not the place for this discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's my main reason for thinking he's not.
Yeah, I'm not accusing you, or I'm not like picking on you for thinking Socrates is innocent. That's fine. But I mean, what is corrupting the youth? I mean, didn't he corrupt the youth in the sense that the youth now doesn't believe in the principles of Athenian state, Athenian government, the way they did in the past? So he did shake confidence in the government. He did question power. And if the laws are made by the power, then yes, he violated those laws intentionally or unintentionally. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is that what is it that makes us believe in the power of the laws other than authority, other than power itself? Why do we think that we should follow the laws? Yes, Emily.
Well, I mean, I know a lot, like, if you don't follow the law, there's usually going to be some kind of punishment. So even if you're not following the law out of some kind of moral code, you're following it, like, out of fear of punishment.
Okay, now, if we are following the laws just out of fear of punishment, what is it that is missing there?
Why do we fear the punishment? Like, what is the punishment that we have to be fear of?
Well, in his case, death. I mean, in our case, mostly probably will end up in jail. Loss of our freedom. So like, then what kind of beings are human beings? What kind of creatures are we? We are just like every other animal who do certain things and don't do certain things simply because they are fearful of the consequences. So is it the case that you believe that killing is wrong, or you don't kill people even though you sometimes dream about it? I'm joking, Riley. I didn't mean like, you are dreaming about it. But if you don't kill people because you are afraid of the consequences, would you kill somebody if you were not afraid of the consequences and nothing would happen? Seriously? Nobody? I mean, would you kill like a horrible person? Would you kill a serial killer?
No, because how does that make sense?
What's that?
I mean, first of all, I think it's the wrong thing to do, and I also think it's not logically consistent to say that, oh, killing's wrong, so now I'm going to kill you. What the hell?
I mean, okay, this is sort of a typical, not philosophical, but sort of an ethical problem. Like, if you could have killed Hitler, would you? Like before 1930.
I don't know, because then you get into the whole problem of like the time travel, like.
No,
I don't know.
I'm just talking about like a principle. Like, I mean, we do. I mean, again, like we already established you cannot operate with the principle killing is wrong, because that's not always the case. Because we do sometimes have to kill, we do kill, etc. So the question is, how do we justify that? Is it only because we are fearful of the consequences, or there is something inherently wrong with it? And if there is, what is that? what is it that is inherently wrong? Namely, because we already accepted that we cannot say do not kill under any circumstance. Because if somebody is trying to kill you, you kill them. That's even the basic law that recognizes that. So self-defense, that's an exception. Defense of others is an exception. In certain states, in the United States, like laws like holding your ground and all that. So we already write that into the law. So I'm asking as a moral, ethical question, when would it be okay to eliminate somebody who would cause enormous harm, like Hitler territory harm? Emily, you were going to say something and you were cut off. So.
Oh no, the conversation moved past it.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so again, we are raising these questions. You are all getting confused, which is okay. I'm not like sort of trying to give you a particular position, but trying to articulate how Socrates is interpreting his position. So he is saying that I am not guilty of these things, but he does those things. Now, maybe he's saying I should be able to do these things. So, whenever you say you are not guilty, ironically, you are somehow affirming the law. Because you are saying that I haven't done that, which means if I had done it, it would have been wrong. But you could also be saying, I have done it, I should still not be punished because that's not a just law. That's not the right position. So you are not claiming that you are innocent, you are claiming that what decides your innocence, the law itself, is wrong. That's a separate issue. And there are multiple examples of this in history. What was the law? Like slavery is obviously an example in the United States. Like, if slavery is the law, should you follow the law? And, there are certain laws, many laws in this country as of now, as we speak, that you should not follow. And you should not say you are innocent. You should say, yes, under this law, I'm guilty, but I'm innocent because the law itself is false, wrong, etc. So, but he says, so I am accused of being pretentious. I'm accused of inventing new gods, and I corrupt the youth, etc., because they say I am wise. So I know things. I have this reputation, but my wisdom is really non-wisdom. My wisdom is not knowing something. My wisdom is not knowing something. And in that sense, that is the most pretentious, I suppose, because he doesn't have anything. He still thinks he is the wisest. He thinks he doesn't know anything. That's why he thinks he is the wisest. And in fact, this comes from the gods, because God says Socrates is the wisest person on earth. Apollo does, the Delphi that he gives the reference to, the oracle in Delphi. And he says he's the wisest man. And he says, of course not, I'm not. And then he starts questioning other people and recognizing those who claim to know actually don't know. But those who don't claim to know at least know that they don't. And that's his wisdom. And he says on page 25D, he says, I am wiser than this man. It is likely that neither of us knows anything worthwhile. But he thinks he knows something when he does not. Whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know, so I'm likely to be wiser than he to this small extent that I do not think I know what I do not know. So in a bizarre way, a specific kind of ignorance becomes wisdom. A specific kind of ignorance, namely that recognition of not knowing, of knowing that you don't know. Now, again, this is not a sort of scientific, discursive, philosophical point, because you cannot pass any course with this kind of attitude. You cannot go to a biology class and say, I know biology the best because I at least know that I don't know, and you guys don't know anything. You'll probably not be successful in content-wise in that class. But this is a way of living. Namely, I know certain things about the world, but I know them with the recognition that I actually do not know them. Those are, I mean, I think in an interesting way, that is the most scientific attitude, because science itself makes believing in science dogmatically impossible. So if you are really scientific in your thinking, you must have that skeptical attitude always present with respect to the content. And at the moment that you say, oh, this is true, this is absolutely true, you cannot really be a scientist. Because then you are actually going against the spirit of science and you are invoking power. You are saying like, oh, this is the correct discourse. Okay, he says, I looked around, I looked at everybody, politicians, poets, etc., everybody who claims this is the accusations against philosopher. So on page 26, he says, furthermore, the young men who follow me around, there are young men who are following him around, of their own free will, those who have most leisure, the sons of the very rich, which is really a problem. There's this old guy who is ugly, corrupting the children of rich people, going against them. So that's bad. Take pleasure in hearing people questioned. They themselves often imitate me and try to question others. I think they find an abundance of men who believe they have some knowledge, but know little or nothing. Now, you are young people. Is that, I mean, relatively compared to me. So is there pleasure in questioning authority? Do you get pleasure from, or you don't even question anymore because you don't even believe in it?
I mean, for my government, I always question all the time. Like, why would they do this? Why would they do that? Or recently, actually, my country is currently now in kind of the second wave of COVID-19. And when they found like the first person to had like community infected, they decided to book all the flights for the tourists in the country to basically went back to where they're from. But at the same time, they decided not to make like the tests, like the PCR tests immediately. They had to ask the authority of the airport to get access, like to get permission to do that. So sometimes I really like, why would they do that? Why would they not like ask the citizens to be wait for like half a day or even a day to trade with their safety? Sometimes I do really ask that, but because I feel like my voice is not enough, so the government bodies will listen. So sometimes I'm not even bothered to ask anyone anymore.
Okay, so are you in Vietnam? I'm sorry, is that where?
Yeah, I'm in Vietnam, yeah.
Okay, that's it. That's it. I mean, does that give pleasure to you though? Like knowing that your government is doing things that are inconsistent? Is it?
Uh, well, if it's not because like the situation we have to deal with is not because of the pandemic. Sometimes it gives me like, well, I know better than them. I really want to like have a seat in the governing body, but at the same time, I think like, would my decision too extreme for people to understand why I did that? And I'm the type of person that can make people feel uncomfortable with my saying because I always say what I think. So maybe the reaction of them is not ideal to be say at least, and sometimes it make some people misunderstanding.
Sure. I mean, you wouldn't make a good politician in the 21st century if you really say what you think. That's not really a good idea at all. Uh, but now, the reason I'm asking on pleasure is because he uses the expression pleasure. Young men who follow me around of their own free will, those who have most leisure, the sons of the very rich, take pleasure in hearing people question. What is this pleasure that when we have, when we observe power to be questioned?
I don't even know if it's so much of like pleasure, but it's just like knowing that someone who is like above you or should know more than you like doesn't, and you know, not necessarily that you know more than them, but like the fact that I can question you and you can't answer me, and so now you're like nervous, like, well, you don't know, you can't explain yourself. That it's not, I don't want to say pleasure, but it kind of is, because it's like, so you're not all high and mighty. You don't know all that you say that you know.
No, I mean, you can say pleasure. I mean, there's nothing wrong with like, not like pleasure, like uh, sensuous pleasure, like eating or blah, blah, but it is a sort of intellectual pleasure to observing that people who claim to know, they don't. So, um, but then there is like one separation we have to make, because Dai said something about like, I know better than they do and I can go and like become a politician. You don't need to feel that. Actually, you may not even know that. In fact, sometimes, do you ever get pleasure from your own ignorance? Do you get pleasure when you discover something about yourself that, oh, I used to think that and I was so wrong, and I was questioned, and I felt like I don't know what I'm talking about? Do you ever feel pleasure from that?
Um, I, I personally, it's not like it's not really like what you say, but like I value that like ignorance, because like when you know more, like you're like what you do is kind of like restricted, like based on your knowledge, like you limit yourself with like the possibilities like of the things you can do. But like when you're ignorant, like I think there is like more of like the possibilities, like of like what kind of like things you can, like what kind of impacts you can make
Uh-huh.
in a way. So I don't know. I think it's not like the pleasure of like being ignorance, but like I think it's kind of like the value of like being ignorant in a way.
Okay, values certainly, but so we have a complicated relationship to power. Namely, when we don't have it, we don't like it. But when we have it, we somehow love it. So it's a very strange kind of phenomenon. So we love certain politicians to be questioned, just like even get pleasure out of it. But we don't like to be questioned. We don't like to be exposed to the same thing. Now, there's a difference. You might not like that because I don't have any position in society in which I exercise power. So I do not enjoy being questioned unless I am the senator or a president or some kind of position of power, etc. Now, the question is, what is the nature of that power? Namely, I want people to do things that I tell them to. But there is also a different kind of power that I like people do things that are even against my position of authority, against my position of power. Namely, like, Riley was talking about his dreams. Like, my dream is that I'm going to say something. And one of you, many of you, will say, no, you're absolutely wrong. That is completely inconsistent, meaningless, stupid. You don't know what you are talking about. If you can say that, if you can demonstrate that, if you can show that, that actually is a pleasure for me. Because then you think for yourself and you develop your arguments and you can understand the material. So this is a different type of relationship. Like, whenever I hear like teaching is always a position of power. Yes, if you teach dogmatically, that is a position of power. If I tell you what the right thing is and I want you to say that back to me, then it is a power relation. But if that very exercise for you to undermine my authority, any intellectual authority, for you, not for me, then that's a different kind of relationship. So Socrates here is, they take pleasure out of this. Now, they will not take the same kind of pleasure if they become their fathers. If they get the position of power, they don't like to be questioned. Now, I realize this, like, today, we kind of cringe when authority is questioned. An authority, especially today, cannot really respond to criticism. They just want to suppress criticism. They don't want to hear it. They want to say the opposite, etc. But unless you can really criticize authority, undermine the authority, that's not really the philosophical moment. So therefore, to teach philosophy is really has to teaching against itself, because you should not accept any dogmatic opinions from anybody, even that opinion itself. You should not accept dogmatic opinion because I said to you, but you get a particular pleasure in power being dismantled. And that is the pleasure that people have that the authorities cannot stand. Because if you say, I don't like this, I want this, authority can deal with that. Authority cannot deal with the fact that no authority is actually legitimate. So authority always tries ways of making itself legitimate, and if you criticize it, then it will make it legitimate by incorporating your criticism. But if your criticism is against the very logic of authority, namely, you should not push people to do certain things that they don't think is right. That undermines authority because it's always going to do that. It has to do that. That's the nature of political power. So when I say if I might have institutional power as a result of being a teacher, so I can assign you grades, etc. But if I ever feel like you are doing something you don't want to do, you don't agree to doing, you are just doing it for the sake of pleasing the authority, then that really undermines for Socrates the whole point. So actually Socrates is not only not corrupting the youth, he is making youth uncorruptible if possible, namely, no authority is going to corrupt the youth, because authority corrupts. Corrupts in the sense that you now have to do these things and you are not going to do these things. And your possibilities are limited. So he says, therefore, he says, the result is that those whom they question are angry, not with themselves, but with me. They say, that man Socrates is pestilential fellow who corrupts the young. If one asks them what he does and what he teaches to corrupt them, they are silent as they do not know, but so as not to appear at a loss, they mention those accusations that are available against all philosophers about things in the sky and things below the earth, about not believing in God and making the worse, stronger argument. They would not want to tell the truth. I'm sure that they have been proved to lay claim to knowledge, then they know nothing. So you accuse them of corrupting the youth precisely because you can't admit that you don't know what you're talking about. And that's really what the authority cannot accept. Namely, I don't have any basis. My authority is not based on any knowledge. It just is what it is. Now, if you start believing that there is an authority, including science and your teachers or any sort of positive kind, then you should be suspicious of that. You should be suspicious of yourself, of the authority that can be exercised upon other people. And as soon as you start thinking from the perspective of authority, you become an insider and thinking from the perspective of power. You think how to get other people behave. Then you might want to go work in the government. Then you might because you think you know better. That's the only reason. You want to be a politician because you know better than these politicians. I mean, you might even have fantasies about becoming a president or something, which because you know how to rule. That's what Socrates is questioning. And he claims he doesn't have any of those. So he continues, I'm sure that they have been proved to they don't know nothing. These people are ambitious, violent, and numerous. They are continually and convincingly talking about me. They have been filling your ears for a long time with vehement slanders against me. I have hidden or disguised nothing. I know well enough that this very conduct make me unpopular, and this is proof that what I say is true, that such is the slander against me, and that such are its causes. If you look into this either now or later, this is what you will find. So he is trying to explain to the authority why he is questioning the authority. So of course he's going to be killed. Of course he's guilty because those 300 people are sitting there and judging him on the basis of the fact that they know whether he is guilty or not. So it is a kind of paradoxical defense, right? Because if you defend yourself against these charges, you somehow have to accept the authority of those who are judging you. And he's a philosopher. He doesn't accept that. That's why he has to die. So it's a very confusing text because if you are thinking, oh, he's making a good defense, but then not really. He is really kind of undermining the very context in which you can defend yourself. He should have said, no, I don't corrupt the youth. I really think that you are wonderful. The gods are great. The authority is wonderful. It is powerful. It's great, etc. Any questions about the text, parts that you don't understand, had difficulties following? I'm assuming you are reading and makes reasonable amount of sense. Yes? Yes. Okay. I see some thumbs up from people. Okay, on page 31, thank you for thumbs up. That's nice. So, how do the protocols work? What do you mean? Clayton.
So this is my first time being able to join the Zoom, so I'm not exactly sure like how that's set up.
Well, we read the protocol the first half, and who is doing next week? Emily, Maya, and Chang, right?
Yeah.
So we'll just write it, and then we'll read at the beginning of the session.
So what does it include though?
Well, it's a class notes. So I explained that in the. Did you read the syllabus?
Oh yeah.
Okay, it's in the syllabus. So 3 people are going to get together somehow virtually, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I'm just like, how do I know who's like in my group though?
Oh, that's also on the list that you signed up for.
Okay, because I put my name on the list, but I wasn't sure if it was like how it worked because
you are with
my
Rosie.
name said somewhere at first and then I moved it.
So you are on September 29th.
Okay.
Last day of classes. It is with Alvaro and Rosie.
All right.
The last day of classes. So.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Any questions about the text? Anything that is not clear? Anything you want to discuss? Yes, no, just go ahead.
Something I was thinking about when reading it is like, Socrates feels a little bit like a different version of himself from
Dialogues?
From before, yeah, in his conversation out front. It just feels like he's a little bit more of an authority in this one, because he's not, like, he's still talking a lot about his ignorance and all of that. But when it comes down to it, like, he is like saying that you should believe me and that I'm speaking the truth and stuff like that. And so I've been thinking about like these like 2 versions of him and how they connect together. And if he really actually does believe what he's presenting here to all of them, and if he actually has hope that it will come through to them, because there's a lot of talk that he has about how like he has a really big job to do, and in the time that he has, like, it's unlikely that he'll actually achieve what he's trying to achieve. So I don't know, I'm just trying to like get into his head a little bit more and understand exactly what is going on in there.
Well, there's really nothing, because this is Plato writing on behalf of Socrates. So what you are asking is like, how does Plato want to characterize Socrates?
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether Socrates believed that philosophers can play a role in society, Plato certainly does. And he thinks that they are the wisest, including Socrates, and that's why they should be the ruler. That's what Plato believes. Now, Plato might be wrong. I mean, he's probably dead wrong, because what Socrates is doing is that, in fact, his enterprise is contradictory. Because you want to live in a society which you want to criticize, you want to question. Now, Plato happens to think that's the best way to contribute to that society. But in this day and age, we believe almost exactly the opposite. We say, if you question your society as radical as Socrates does, you are not patriotic enough, you are not loyal enough, you are not good enough, you are not good enough an ally, you are not a good enough supporter, etc. So we want obedience and acceptance. We don't believe that questioning is the best way to approach any group. So like, if one of you started questioning the logic of the class, why is this a class? Why are we teaching it? And why are we doing this? And I would probably go like, hey, this is a class. This is Arlam. You by nature defend whatever organization that you are trying to construct. But Plato believed if you question that very authority while you are in it, that would be the best way to live. So you should be allowed to do it. You should be encouraged to do it. In fact, those who question should rule because they will come up with the least dogmatic, most adaptable position. So Socrates believes that, Plato's Socrates believes that he has a very significant role to play in society. And that I agree to the extent that the indication that whenever people want to consolidate their authority, they attack questions. They don't want to be questioned. I think one of the things like, politicians, like, all of them, but most recently, Donald Trump. He doesn't want to answer any question. He doesn't even want a question. And whenever there is a question, that's by definition nasty. That's a nasty question. He never has, unless it's not like, if they ask you like, why are you so wonderful? Then he's like, okay, that's a great question. But like, it's always a nasty question because it questions the authority. Now, the question for us is that, is an authority that answers its critics best, or it suppresses its critics? Ironically, the best authority is the one that convinces everybody, even those who question. So that's why Plato believes Socrates should run Athens, but of course that didn't happen because Plato himself is a philosopher, and they are not going to let him. Now, do I in principle believe that would have been great? Yes. But, but there's also a human reality in which this is a question of power. This is not a question of thinking. So he says, this is the truth of the matter. This is on page 31, marginal 28E. Whenever a man has taken a position that he believes to be the best or has been placed by his commander, there he must, I think, remain and face danger without a thought for death or anything else rather than disgrace. It would have been a dreadful way to behave, man of Athens, if at Potidaea, Amphilos, and Delium, I had, at the risk of death, like everyone else, remained at my post where those who had elected to command had ordered me, and then when God ordered me, as I thought and believed, to live the life of a philosopher, to examine myself and others, I had abandoned my post for fear of death and anything else. So he believes, I think for the sake of the people in front of him, he was appointed to this position by God. And his job is to be a philosopher. And his job is to question knowledge, people who claim to have knowledge. And I cannot abandon this. That is my, like now you are accusing me and you are threatening me for death. And here he takes this question of ignorance, I touched upon this a little bit, but it was coming out of here. To fear death, gentlemen, is no other than to think oneself wise when one is not. To think one knows what one does not know. No one knows whether death may not be the greatest of all blessings for man, and yet men fear it as if they knew that it is the greatest of evils. And surely it is the most blameworthy ignorance to believe that one knows what one does not know. So he thinks, oh, death. I don't fear it. I don't know. How can I fear something I don't know? And what do you fear when you fear death? I mean, are you afraid of that? Nobody is. You can't say, yes, I'm afraid of that. Thumbs up, I'm afraid of that. What is it that you're afraid of? A little bit? There is no emoji.
I think I personally don't fear death, but I don't know if other people feel it, but I'm afraid of how I die, I guess.
Yeah, like pain. Are you afraid of pain? And pain?
Yeah, pain. So in that thought, I don't know if Socrates ever, I mean, he didn't mention anyway, of how you die and whether he was afraid of that.
Well, I think most people, when they say they are afraid of death, they are afraid of the unknown. Therefore, you do two things. You either pretend to know, and there are various ways in which you can accomplish that, including God, etc. And you can say, okay, I'm going to go to heaven, hell. I mean, nobody is like happy to go to hell, but like you can say, there is going to be something. But the unknown, the nothing, that's, he claims that he's not afraid of that, because to be afraid of that would be too presumptuous, would be blameworthy, because I pretend to know what I don't know. So this radical not knowing, the ignorance, is actually when people say, and this is one of the things that comes up with in context of philosophy as a way of life, is preparation for death. Because philosophy, Plato says, Socrates says, is a preparation for death, namely that which you don't know. And that's always a constant preparation in the way in which we live our lives too. Namely, we are always confronting what we don't know and the fact that we don't know. And the ultimate thing that we don't know is death. And anybody who tells you that they know what happens after death is the authority. And as you know, of course, the ultimate authority in the world is those who claim to know what happens after. Religion. That was very strong authority. If you can tell people what will happen after death, you can rule them before that. Now, with respect to Socrates himself, I shy away from that question that Nolia was posing, because I really don't know which one is Socrates. I don't really know what Socrates himself is thinking. I know what Plato wants Socrates to say, because he's his student. And I know to a certain extent that Plato was upset that Socrates was killed, because he thought he should not be killed. But also, he himself might be killed too, because he's following, so to speak, Socrates' footsteps. But the paradox is, of course, for Plato is that you can never follow Socrates because there's nothing to follow. So therefore, Plato comes up with his own philosophical convictions that a lot of people afterwards say, that's not Socrates, that's Plato himself, which is like the paradox. Socrates is someone that when you follow him, you find yourself. And I think that's really a very good way of characterizing philosophers. Like, you follow philosophers. I mean, people ask me, like, do you like this philosopher? It's like, I don't like any philosophers. I follow them in order to find myself. So you don't like them because they are wonderful. They're all horrible, most of them. So, but when you read them, including Socrates, Plato, or like any number of philosophers, you find yourself, you don't find them. And I think that's a really important aspect of philosophy, that you don't have like authorities. You don't have like role models, etc. It would be horrible. Like, everybody criticizes philosophy, like, oh, it's too much this, too much that, too much. Like, I always say, like, I hate philosophers. I mean, not hate, but like not visceral hate, but like, I don't like take any of them to be my like hero or something. And this is the one who said the truth, or this is the one I should follow, etc. You really find yourself when you read them. You don't find them. And that's what happened to Plato with respect to Socrates. He tried to follow Socrates, but what he came up was himself. So he's not a leader. Socrates wouldn't make a good leader in terms of 21st century leadership programs, and he wouldn't be a good role model, and he wouldn't be a, I don't know, like life coach. Like, he wouldn't be a life coach. He wouldn't be like a good guru that you should follow or something. Yeah. Now, he does say that he tried to live his public life in relation to his private convictions. And I think that's a really important point with Socrates, is that he does not act differently in private as opposed to in public. And this is what we observe a lot, even accept it as inevitable. So, you know, when politicians are in public, they say certain things. And we expect them to say those in public, whatever they think and say in private. So you almost need to have a posture. Like, you might think certain things, but you should not tell them in public. In fact, we punish only if you say it in public. But we don't want people to think differently. We just don't want them to say it. So don't appear like that. Give the right message. Give the appropriate signal, etc. But we don't really know how they are in private. And we let them be, like, privately you can be whatever you want, but don't say them in public. And Socrates is really questioning that distinction, because that's the definition of appearance. People appear in a certain way. We want them to appear in a certain way. We don't care how they are. And mostly that's what brings this dichotomy between words and deeds. You should say the right thing, but you can do whatever. So, now he says, I'm not also saying that I'm afraid of death. I am demonstrating in my actions that I'm not afraid of death. That's the notion of speaking the truth. Living truly, being truthful in your living. This is on page 35. All of this. So after he was on page 38, after he found guilty, he speaks about what punishment should be given to him, because that's like the custom in that. And then on page 39, 38a, he says probably one of the most famous things that he was quoted by: the unexamined life is not worth living for human beings. And you will, so that's the sort of the question of examination, examining your life constantly. Unexamined life is not worth living. I'm sure that you have seen it on some memes and posters and stuff like that. And then he says, you are going to regret having killed me, because I perform a function in society in a way that you cannot foresee, because you only value authority, but you don't value the act of questioning the authority. Sometimes people say this, like, it's patriotic to question your government. Really? I mean, is it? Do they like tell you, oh, you are so patriotic when you question your government? I mean, we say that, we pay lip service. We put it on memes and like posters, etc., but we don't really practice it. Am I getting the impression that you are getting tired? Even through the camera, I can tell. Any questions? Okay, we can stop. Should we try, for those of you who are on campus on Thursday, another face-to-face? How many of you are here actually? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, yeah. All right, so let's try to see how it goes on Thursday. But let's start around like 8:30, not at 8. so it starts around 8:30. I'll put the Zoom meeting at 8:32. So let's try to meet from 8:30 to 11, whatever, and see how it works. If it causes more problems, I think that the Zoom is working fine for now. If we don't get substantial benefit from meeting face-to-face, we can meet obviously once in a while. But also, like, for those of you who are on campus, I bought myself a screen. So if you have questions, I have office hours. I'm in my office. I mean, I know we don't go to people's offices nowadays, but if you have questions, feel free to, and then you can write me an email. I try to answer emails as quickly as possible. So if you are having issues with the class and if you have questions, there are always ways in which we can meet. So you can find me. Okay, well, Thursday at 8:30, Zoom and Center for Science and Technology 300. Okay? I'll see you there.
I have one question. We're finishing it all for Thursday, right?
Yes, we are. I mean, I'm going to lecture most of Thursday's beginning because it will be hard to do a discussion with both of them at the same time. And then I'll go through apology parts that we haven't covered, and Crito and Fado, and then that will be the end of our discussion. And I tell on Thursday what we are going to read for next week.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
All right. Have a good Wednesday, I suppose. Okay.